So I want to say greetings to the nations. I get a lot of, I get more feedback from out of the country than I do from in the country, which is interesting because some people ask us sometimes, well, who are you connected with? I said, well, we're connected with a few churches here around town and so on, but we're connected with a whole bunch of churches around the world. And so I don't know how that works, but it does. And you'd think that, you'd have your connections all in the same part of the world, like Kenya and Tanzania. That makes sense. But when you go the whole way to the other side of the world, almost straight across to Fiji, and you connect those two together, say, wow, how comes you're going to Fiji and you're going to Kenya? Well, it's interesting. I didn't decide that. It's just some places the Lord connected us, and some of them many, many years ago, and the connections remained from many different countries. But we spend most of our time right now in Africa or all the way across the sea to Fiji. And they're wonderful people, and they're a blessing. It's nice to be with them, and they encourage us, and we encourage them, and it just works together. So bless you guys today, and thanks for enjoying time with us in the video. And we look forward to coming in person again. And so a lot of people are asking me when that might be. I will tell you as soon as possible, okay? And so, again, we just ask the Lord for direction on our schedule, direction on what we carry for His Word. And we get excited because we watch God's Word change things every place we go. It's not us arriving, it's carrying something that He has given us to carry. So that's exciting. And so even today, we had many people talking about the transition here in our country being very much like the Israelites being led across the sea. And that was quite a challenging time if you look at that time period, because the Israelites were brought out of Egypt and everybody's celebrating. And they're carrying all kinds of goods they didn't have before because they were slaves. They didn't have anything. In fact, a slave doesn't even own their own clothing. It's all borrowed, all given to them. And so when they left, they're wearing nice clothing, they're carrying jewelry and stuff, they're carrying weapons, and everyone has been healed. And it's like, whoa, God did an amazing thing. And then it looked like they kind of zigged and zagged a little bit instead of going straight where they were going to go, and ended up with the sea in front of them. And Pharaoh says, well, that's a good place to have them. I think I want to bring them back because I'm already missing their work. And so he sends the entire army after them. And now you got to understand, wonderful things just happened. And they saw the mighty hand of God to get them out of there. And now it looks like the enemy's all kinds of bent out of shape, and he's going to get revenge because he didn't want it to happen. And so the enemy is behind them and the sea is in front of them. Both of them things look impossible. To turn around and fight the enemy, the Egyptians are like leaders of the world, and they didn't get there by accident. They have a very powerful and a very, what would you say, a deadly army force, a military force. And they can do a lot of things which got them where they are. And on the other hand, these guys, a bunch of guys, used to be slaves. They're carrying weapons, but they haven't been trained in the weapons. In fact, even later on, the Lord said He led them around this particular country and over that way because they didn't know how to fight yet. So they're in a place that was very, very challenging, and they have the military forces behind them and the sea in front of them, and they're just all shook up, and they're starting to ask Moses, why'd you bring us here? There's people in the States right now asking the Lord, why did you bring us here? We have some crazy officials trying to run the government or trying to destroy our nation through ways of running the government. And we have all these things going on, and it looks like we just ran up against the wall. Now, what are we going to do? Well, as I've been saying, last week, in fact, weeks and weeks and weeks, I said, do not fear. Don't find yourself getting tangled up in fear. When Moses was there, the Lord told him, do not fear. And then what did He tell him? He says, hold out your rod and part the sea. Well, that's completely unheard of. So my point to us today is, listen what the Lord is saying, because what He tells you to do next could be totally unheard of, and impossible. But with him, it's not impossible. And as we know, they all crossed over dry land where the sea used to be. And it's interesting because some historians that are trying to debunk the whole story said, well, you know, it was known as the Sea of Reeds, and it was only shallow, 6 to 10 inches of water. And I say, you know, it's even more amazing to me that the whole Egyptian army could die and drown in 6 to 10 inches of water. And so that story doesn't hold water. What holds water is Moses' rod out across the sea, and it says, and the water stacked up as a wall on both sides of them, and they walked on dry land. And when they crossed the sea, there's something that was told to them that was very powerful. It says, look at the Egyptians, because you will never see them again. It's a done deal. Well, now, if we're told that our situation in our country is like crossing over. First of all, you can understand there can be some real difficult times if you look back where things have come from, because as we know, the deep state are the ones that are going crooked or sideways, the ones making their own laws, the ones that do all kinds of evil and the judge turns a blind eye, the ones who do right and go to prison. You know, you can look at all those things and you say, you know what? The enemy's hard on our tail. And where is there to go? There's no place to go. Watch what the Lord's about to do. And I think it comes down to the same thing he told them. He says, look closely because you'll never see them again. He didn't say study them and their ways and their habits. And he says, no, watch what's happening. And that happened in a very short while. As they made their way across, the enemy follows them through the miraculous. Can you imagine that? There's a miracle for God's people, and the enemy says, we'll step it, we'll enjoy that miracle also. And we'll still accomplish what we came to accomplish, because they believe the miracle happened because of their God, who would be directly across the sea. He parted the sea. First of all, why would their God part the sea for the Israelites to walk across? You know, the enemy never gets things straight. He always has them all kinds of twisted, and then he expects you to believe them. Some of this woke stuff is so twisted, it makes no sense whatsoever. And they get all bent out of shape if you don't believe it. It's like, what kind of crazy are you? I mean, anybody with a half a thinking mind can say, that doesn't work.
They get mad if you try to bring logic.
They get mad if you have any logic whatsoever. In fact, for quite a while, for the last couple of years, the news was saying, you can't believe what you saw. You need to believe how we told you. I said, you know what? That's not how it works. And so the key being, the enemy tried to enjoy the miracle also to accomplish their deal to capture and return the slaves. And so they started into the same thing the Israelites just walked through on dry land, and it destroyed all of them. Watch what happens. Watch closely what's coming behind us and trying to box us in. Don't fear. Look forward and walk and see what the Lord does. And I also heard multiple prophets speak and say, you know what? It's very much like Queen Esther. And that caught my attention a little bit because I really, really enjoy that story about Queen Esther. And, you know, as I read through the story again, I started noticing things. Every time you read through that stuff, you notice stuff you never saw before. And I remember teaching on this quite a while back, and one of the things which I pointed out that time, when the king put on a party, he put on a party, man. I want to tell you something. That was not an ordinary party. Do you know his kingdom went from India all the way up around and down to Ethiopia? It was absolutely huge. And when it says he sent out couriers on fast-bred steeds, steeds to go take his verdicts, his laws and stuff, they had thousands of miles to cover to get over to India to tell them what's going on that the king just proclaimed back home. I mean, it's not like they sent it on the wire and they had that in the next 15 minutes. You know something I never noticed before? The party and all that jazz happened at 3 years when he was the king. And when he actually, what would you say, inaugurated Esther as queen, it was 4 years after that. It was the 7th year. I thought, you know, to us it happened and it happened and it happened, because you can read it in a couple of verses. There's like 7 years went on, man. This whole thing, the party was at 3 years. The party lasted for 180 days. Who has been at a big party here lately? I mean, like Jared and Kristen are at a party right now, and it's a good one, and they're into it, and it's powerful. And friends of theirs are getting married, and people are taking time out, and they're spending time at the hotel, even though it's local, because everybody wants to be together. It's a time of celebration. But I want to tell you something. About tomorrow or the next day, it's all done, it's over. This king put a party on, and I'm telling you, he knew how to put a party on. He put that party, it says the party lasted for 180 days. And he brought the leaders in from all the nations around there, and he was king over all of that. The nation of the Medes and the nation of the Persians, all of these leaders came in there, and he's showing them his great wealth. His wealth was astounding. They said he was serving everybody in golden goblets or golden cups, and none of them was the same. Every single one was a handcrafted special golden cup. It's like, whoa, it's something to have a set of something, but man, if you got every single one is the perfect handcrafted something. I mean, and it goes on to talk about what the floors were made out of and the curtains. I mean, it was astounding. And it says, and the king's wine flowed freely, but you didn't have to drink. I thought, well, that's good news. For some of us, we don't enjoy wine. Me. But the point being, the whole feast of that time, that was 7 days of amazing feast, went on and on and on. And so after all that happened, that's when Queen Vashti said she's not coming. Well, everybody out there was kind of a little bit, because they enjoyed the king's wine and so on and so on. And she's thinking, it's not the best idea in the world for me to show up looking like a queen looks and have all these wild and crazy dudes out there, half tipsy, admiring her. And so she decided not to come. Well, be it right or wrong or whatever, it didn't work well with the king. And she got pushed out. There was a whole big deal. And then they started searching. In fact, it didn't happen right away. Like I said, it was 4 years later when Queen Esther came in. I didn't recognize that before, because the party was at 3 years, and she was brought in at 7 years. So it was 4 years in between there. So for a while, the king was just without a queen, and he's good with that. Then after a while, it says, and he remembered Vashti, and then, he was pretty impressed with her. She was gorgeous and all that. And then his officials said, well, why don't we find you somebody that's better? That's what they mentioned to start with, but now they're actually actively looking. And they found these ladies, and they had to go through a year of preparation. Some of you husbands, you think your ladies take a long time to get ready for church. These ladies had to take a year to get ready. Can you imagine that? I mean, it was special oils. I don't know what you soak in for a year to make you just that wonderfully beautiful and smell so good. But oh my goodness, a whole year to get ready. And then they would visit with the king. And the king ultimately decided, Esther was the coolest and all. That the story about that. But then it comes down to Mordecai, the uncle. And some people call him Mordecai. However you want to say it, it's no problem. But Mordecai is the uncle of Esther. He raised her because she had lost her family. She also didn't have an easy life. But now she's queen. But he told her, don't tell the king about our people. She said, fine, that's no problem. And so, interesting enough, Mordecai was at the gate. Mordecai was keeping an eye on things. Mordecai actually was very sharp, very vigilant. He knew what was going on. He was on top of things. He was a man of God. And along those lines, when it came to keeping an eye on things, he recognized a problem with some of the gatekeepers, or the keepers of the door, the word calls it. And 2 of the eunuchs keeping the doors for the king got all bent out of shape about something the king did, or they thought he shouldn't have done, or something, and they're going to take out the king. There's a coup. And I don't know that the coup had anything to do with them trying to step into power. The coup simply had to do with getting rid of the king. And Mordecai brings that to the attention of Esther. Esther takes it to the king, and she gives his name as where it came from. They check it out, and it's for real. And so the two guys are hanged that they're gotten rid of, and it's written down in the official log, all is well, no problem. And as time goes by, there's a guy named Haman, and he catches the eye of the king, and Haman is brought up and up and up, and after a while, he's like second to the king, one of the top guys. And Haman is so full of himself, and he has such a big estate, and he has so many kids, and he has so much money, and so much stuff, that he just thinks the whole world revolves around him. But one thing annoys him to pieces is this Mordecai dude sitting out by the gate will not bow down to him. I thought, boy, he's got a personal problem, don't you think? Goodness gracious. I mean, he has, as far as we can say, the king over the known world. And he's second in command. And he got all kinds of everything. But this one guy won't bow down to him, and it's freaking him out. And he's so upset about that he goes to his family and he says, you know what? And he explains to his family, I got this much money, I got this many children, I got this big of an estate, I got everything going for me, but none of that means anything because Mordecai won't bow down to me. You think maybe that's good versus evil? Why would it matter so much about Mordecai not bowing down to him? Because I want to show you something. Mordecai represented good, and Haman represented evil. He was an enemy of God's people, according to the word. And so evil evil basically rules the world at this point, second to the king, and is, as we would say, filthy rich. Why would I say filthy rich? Because he's evil. You can be extremely rich being a good person, and I won't call you filthy rich. But if you're evil, I'll call you filthy rich. There's a few names I won't mention right now, but they are filthy rich. Why do I know they're filthy rich? Because they take their riches and try to create filth as far as destroying kingdom things, as far as coming down on churches, as far as, what do they keep saying? Lessening the population. I said, that's fine with me. Start with yourself, dude. But anyway, that's my own personal opinion about the filthy rich. If they want to use their riches in a filthy way to destroy population, et cetera, things are off. They're wrong. Anyway, Naaman, as I would say, is filthy rich. Why would I say filthy rich? Because he's trying to use his riches in a wrong way to destroy the Jews. How did it come about? He says, all of these things that I have, he's talking to his advisors, he's talking to his wife, he's talking to his family. He's sitting there in his big, huge estate, and he says, everything I have, and he explained it all. He's laying it out, just like I am that cool. But it doesn't mean anything because Mordecai won't bow down to me. I'm thinking, what a warped individual. And so his wife comes up with this idea. She says, well, I'll tell you what. In fact, he was in the middle of this whole thing that he got called in to be part of a banquet that the queen was putting on, and only the king and him was there. And he says, and I even have this honor, absolutely astounding. And tomorrow, he said, there's another banquet, and I'm the only one coming except the king. How cool is that? But none of this means anything if Mordecai won't bow down to me. I'm thinking, what a funky dude, man. He has some problems, don't you think? And so his wife says, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you build a gallows? This all happened in one day. He's explaining that all to him, and she says, you build a gallows, and you tell the king that we want to hang Mordecai on there, and you get that done in the afternoon, and by evening time, you can go to the dinner, and life is good, and you can be happy, and you can just enjoy yourself because everything's going your way. Mordecai's out of the way. Everything's wonderful. He said, well, that's a good idea. And that day, he had a gallows built. And before he was even ready, they came to receive him, said, hey, come. You need to come right away. The king is looking for you. Interesting enough, he's out there in the outer courts, and the king is in the inner courts. And according to the law that they have, if you come in there without an invitation and the king doesn't hold out his scepter and say it's okay, you die. It don't matter what you came in for. That's what Esther was so worried about. When she had to go in there and talk to the king, she didn't have an invitation. She had to go in there and they had to hang out, he had to hold out that scepter and say it's okay. When she came in, he was that pleased. The king said, whatever your request is, I'll give it to you. That's before she asked. He said, up to half of my kingdom. Do you hear what I said? Up to half of my kingdom. He's proclaiming this in front of all his officials. Whatever you want, lady. Up to half of everything. I mean, that's nations. That's not a township. That's absolutely huge. And he says, I'll grant your petition. And she says, I'm just asking you to come back again for another banquet tomorrow night. Then I'll ask you what I want to ask. He said, okay, that's good. In the middle of all that, Mordecai didn't bow down. Old Haman went back and had a little fit there. Haman built the gallows and all that kind of stuff. And he comes back and he came a little bit. He says he's going to talk to the king before this all goes down, before the banquet, because he's going to request that Mordecai gets hanged. His troubles will be over. It's all good. Now everybody bows down to me. Everything's wonderful. Life has taken a turn. It's all good. Interesting enough, before all that happened, he came to the king and he said, there's a certain people group, they think differently than you and me. And he says, I'll tell you something. I believe we should get rid of them, and it would be good for your kingdom to just remove these people from your kingdom, and it would make such a powerful difference, and it would be so good for the kingdom, I'll finance it. Yeah, doesn't that sound familiar with today's news? Interesting enough, I just went reading through there and it says, and he offered them a thousand, let me look here where. Sorry about that. I lost my place here. I'm coming up with it. 3:9. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they would be destroyed, and I will 10,000 talents of silver. That's easy to read by. You know what a talent of silver weighs? You remember when Naaman came and he was trying to offer some silver and some gold, and ended up that Gehazi went home with a couple talents of silver. Gehazi couldn't carry it. Naaman had to send servants along to carry. 1 talent is 75 pounds. And so Naaman was carrying a couple thousand pounds of silver and gold and so on. This guy, Haman, says, listen, I will pay 10,000 talents of silver. You know how much that is? 10,000 times 75 is what? I think it's 750,000 pounds. Is that correct? 750,000 pounds of silver, he says, I will give into your treasury that we can take care of all these people. And he says, and then all the goods, the plunder will come back into your. And the king says, oh, well, that's okay, no problem, we can do that. And they made it law. And it says, and they went and they sat down, and the king and Haman were eating and drinking and enjoying this new law. And it says the cities, including the citadel right where the capital, everybody is like, what? I mean, they're saying, what's going on? What kind of strange decree and verdict is this? What's happening? But notice, why I said filthy rich. He had an extreme amount of money. Can you imagine 750,000 pounds of silver? I ran that on my calculator right before we started, just because I thought, now that's interesting. How much would that be? $348 million in today's numbers. He said, listen, I'll give you $350 million. We can get rid of these Jews. Because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. Can you imagine? That is definitely good versus evil. Ain't nobody's going to pay that much for one little problem. But the enemy is freaking out over the goodness of God. He's doing that today also. And you have people like the computer man and people like, I don't even know how to say that, the old guy looks like death warmed over. And I'm not going to say the names because of this going out to the nations. But you got a couple of people that are filthy rich. And they're trying to use their finances to bring filth to the nations because it's not them and us. It's good versus evil. And they're so freaked out, they're saying we got to deplete the population and bring it down to 10% so we can all live better. What about the 90%? You know, and we have to do this and we can't do that and all these crazy things. Paying hundreds of billions of dollars to buy the FBI, to buy the CIA, and to buy our government, and to buy votes, and so on. It just goes on and on and on. Using finances in all the wrong ways. What's happening? It's the same thing. And so now he's made the agreement. He's going to pay $348 million to bring this to pass, to get rid of the Jews, and his life will be good, and he doesn't have to worry about Naaman or Mordecai not bowing down to Naaman anymore. Wow, life is good. So he comes in early to talk to the king. He's hanging out there in the outer courts, and something interesting happened. Always want to keep an eye on what God's doing, okay? The night before, the king couldn't sleep. You think maybe God knew this was all going down? Think he was in on the conversation with the wife and the gallows and all that stuff? The night before, the king couldn't sleep. So he's out there burning the midnight oil, you know, having a cup of tea. He says, get the book out that has all the cool stuff written down and read to me some of the stuff that went on here just lately. And they're reading this happened and that happened and so in this citadel and this is going on and that's going on. And this one day, you remember this, 2 eunuchs were going to take you out. And this dude showed up and gave you the inside scoop, and you live today because of him. He said, whoa, he said, I remember that. He said, what do we do to honor that guy? And they said, well, his name's Mordecai. He said, yeah, I remember that. He said, what did we do to honor him? Well, we didn't do anything. We need to do something about that, you know? And he's there first thing in the morning. He's thinking about this. He said, boy, you know, how are we going to honor this guy? And he says, who's out in the outer court? And they said, oh, Naaman just showed up. Good, send him in. This is his top guy. They have this crazy deal going on. The king doesn't know this crazy deal has to do with anything with Esther and all that. This is all news to him. He doesn't know that. But he said, send Naaman in. And old Naaman comes strutting in there, and he's about ready to ask him. He said, listen, I built a gallows. We can get rid of this Mordecai. He says, life is going to be good for all of us. And the king says, what would you do when you wanted to really honor somebody? And old Naaman just all kinds of full of himself. He's, whoa. He says, now the king's talking about me. He said, let me see. Let me think about that for a minute. I've got an idea. How about you take a robe that the king has worn? I mean, this boy is full of himself, man. Not just a nice robe. Get a robe that the king has already worn, man. The people know this robe. Get that robe that robe. Yeah, that one. And you put that on the old boy, okay? He says, then you set him on a royal steed. He said, I can see it already, he's saying, you know. He said, and then you get somebody to lead that royal steed around town and proclaim, this is what the king would do for somebody he wants to honor. And he's thinking, that'll be good. And the king says, now that is a good idea. And old Naaman said, I knew it. I got it going on. And he's ready to slip the robe on. Uh-oh. What happens next? The king says, that's an excellent idea. And old Naaman says, yeah, that's right. That's a good idea. You think my sleeve size is going to be like your sleeves? We going to be all right here? He says, yeah, why don't you call Mordecai in here? Does he know about Mordecai? What's the king talking about Mordecai? How did Mordecai get it? I didn't mention Mordecai. Call him in here, said. Well, we can call him in here. I'll ask the king right in front of him. Mordecai gets called in. The king says, this is the man I want to honor. Hi! You've got to be kidding. Honor Mordecai. Why? Oh, because he saw something coming down that was bad, and he squelched it. And he's going to again. But that's all. That's to come. He squelched it. Now you put that, don't miss anything that you smell. It's funny. The king says, do exactly like you said and don't miss anything. And you, being the honorable one, lead him through town and you proclaim, this is what the king does for someone he wants to honor. I said, oh my goodness. You know, when God has a plan, it's a plan. And I want to tell you as a church, get ready because you're going to receive honor. Why? Because we stood through things that were out of order. We stood with some tremendous persecution. We stood when everything that was labeled good was called bad. We continue to stand. We continue to pray for our nation when it looked like we're hemmed in and there's evil behind and there's a sea before us. We continue to stand. We did not bow down to the enemy and his plans. You say, well, some did. I say, well, some didn't. And I'm going to tell you something. When you get paraded in front of the people, and it says, this is what the king does to those he honors, it's only the beginning. Because after that, you come back, and it looks like, well, now that's a done deal. It's all taken care of. It only started. There's still the dinner. And old Naaman goes rushing home and his face is falling off of him. And he said, oh man, you ain't even going to believe what happened. I had to walk Mordecai through town and I had to say this is what the king is honoring and things are not good. Well, did you tell him about the gallows and hanging? No, I didn't say anything. And his wife, who said you ought to build the gallows, she said, you know what, dude? Your time's up. It's done for you, man. This Mordecai dude, he's a Jew. It's over. Your history. And before he could get turned around, the eunuchs came and say, hey, whoa, come, you got to come now. They're waiting dinner on you. And so he shows up for the dinner, sitting there, just him and the king and the queen. And he's not nearly so proud and so haughty and stuck up and nose in the air anymore. He's sitting there like, why? The tables have turned. He doesn't know what's going on, but he knows it's not okay. The evil one has been shown. I want to tell you something. The light is coming on, as was spoken for multiple years already, from the prophets, from those in the church who know the enemy is being revealed. And that revelation is bringing a change that is shaking the foundations of the earth realms. The only thing not shaking is the kingdom, because it doesn't shake. And so as the earth realms, as Naaman is sitting in his seat shaking because of what happened in the afternoon, it only begun, man. And so the king says, thanks for dinner. What is your request? She says, I request my life. There's an evil one trying to kill me and my people, and it would be to great harm to the king and his kingdom, a huge loss. And the king says, who would dare to do this crazy thing right in front of me? She said, none other than the evil one, Naaman, sitting here with us. And man, the king blew a breaker. He said, he just freaked. Man, he got up and he stormed out of there. He went out to the garden. He says, I got to think this over thing. I'll roll his head on the spot, man. And he comes back in, and Naaman was that freaked out, asking for his life for the king, that he fell across the king's lap. That was the wrong place to be found when the king came back. Naaman, yeah, sorry about that.
You've been saying Naaman.
Oh, I've been saying Naaman. Sorry about that. Haman. Naaman was from a different story a long time ago. I'm trying to say Haman. Let's not get it all mixed up. I don't have to go through the video and change all the stuff. Haman. We all know it's Haman, right? It's not Naaman. Naaman's not here. He's from a different place. And so Haman falls over the king's lap, or the queen's lap. Now I got the king in on it. Listen, I'm trying to keep it straight here. And the king comes back in, and he's laying over the lap of the queen. That was really bad. He says, "You trying to entice the queen right at my dinner table?" And boy, old Haman, Haman knew his time was up. And so did the guards and the eunuchs around him, because they came and slipped the bag over his head, and the king didn't even say what's going on yet. I'm thinking, the writing's on the wall now, man, and you know where that comes from. That's a whole different story too, right? But the point being, his time is up. And so they slipped the bag over his head, and they're going to take care of this dude. And listen, one of the eunuchs, one of the servants, the king says, "What should we do with this guy?" One of the servants has the inside scoop. If you want to talk about Naaman, one of the servants had the inside scoop with Naaman. Many times, one of the servants has the inside scoop. The servant says to the king, Haman has built a gallows for Mordecai, the one who you honored this afternoon. Whoa. And if I'm correct, I believe the servant says, maybe we should use that for him. I don't remember exactly. I'd have to look that up. I think the servant invited Haman to his own gallows. And the king thought that was a splendid idea, and they took care of him. Interesting enough, can you imagine the $348 million was going to be paid to the Jews? That's just part of that's just his money on hand. He's not laying his life on the line. That's money he'll put towards a little project, because that's what he wanted to happen. He's taken care of on his own gallows. That whole entire estate was given to Esther/Mordecai. The whole thing. And Mordecai basically running that place and enjoying it and having servants, including the very small amount that was given to get rid of the Jews, was $348 million. How much do you think that estate was worth? I mean, we're talking, this isn't just a couple of dollars. This isn't just a king and 40 servants. This is a nation that's huger than the United States. It covers India, and it covers all through the Middle East, and it comes all down into Africa. This is huge. And he owns all of that. Naaman, the second in command to the king. When the king puts a party on, he does it for a half a year. Naaman is second in command. I mean, the money is available. All of that was turned over to Mordecai and Esther. How about that? And then, of course, that whole thing, Mordecai and Esther were given a signet ring. They got to rewrite the whole deal and about who's who and what's going to happen when they're going to take over the Jews. And people were that shook up. It says many people became Jews. How about that? I want to tell you something. There's a parallel with us in our country right now that's absolutely astounding with this story. The enemy thought he could buy his way into getting rid of the church and the godly things. He thought he could buy his way into destroying this country's basics and standards on standing on kingdom things and on the Word of God. And he thought with all that put together and all his clout all over the place, he could bring all these leaders with all this pile of cash, and he could change things for the enemy's kingdom with the money. It's about to have a transfer where it's transferred into the righteous. The transfer is coming. Why do I say that? Because I know the gallows was built. I know the enemy's plan was coming together. I know there's written stuff about, we're getting rid of everything that stands for righteousness. But I want to tell you something. It's not over. I believe the enemy, showing his face like he has, is coming right up on visiting with the king, and it's time to honor the church. Watch how it goes. Watch how it goes. I'm not prophesying at the moment. I'm just looking at the big picture and saying, it's making sense to me. And as the church is honored, what's going to happen? The enemy turns on themselves. His wife says, what, the goose is cooked, they're going to hang you. Said, whoa, she's the one who said build the gallows. How about that? And the transition of finances is coming right behind that. Is the battle over? No, the battle hadn't started yet. They had to write the laws in a proper way, and then they actually had a time of fighting to fulfill the laws. But they won. And not only that, it shook people up that bad. A tremendous amount of people said, I'm going to be a Jew. Watch what happens with the church. When the battle starts and we win, many people say, I'm going to be a Christian. The finances have changed hands. The law has changed into a godly standard. The one in charge now is the one who was persecuted. You watch it come together. And again, I'm just saying there's an amazing parallel running with this story. And we're at a time right now where this last 2 weeks, wow. I think the table was spread and just 3 showed up. The king and the enemy and the queen. And things are about to come out where the church gets honored just completely out of the blue. Said, where'd that come from? Oh, well, they did some honorable things in the past. It's time they're honored. And then what? Then you get rid of the one trying to get rid of 90% of the population. And then you transfer the wealth into the hands of the righteous. And then the laws change into righteousness. And then a huge amount of people say, you know what? I want to be part of the church. Watch how it goes. And so what I'm saying is, when it's shaking, when the gallows is about in the back 40, and the whole world seems to be shaking, when Mordecai was in sackcloth and weeping because of the foolishness of the edicts that come down from the king, when he continued to not bow down to the foolishness, what happened? A transition time came, and boy, when it started slow, but then all of a sudden, in 1 day's time, it went from having the first meal and being too cool to having the second meal and being dead. Watch how it happens. Watch how it comes together. Can you see it? I'm just saying, spend some time in this story this week and allow the Lord to show you some highlights about how it actually went. Because God is still God and he doesn't change. His people still the apple of his eye. That doesn't change. Evil's still trying to take over good. That hasn't changed. But evil gets put in its place from time to time, and there's the time we're in right now. And people say, well, you know, it's been really rough. It's been a long road. It's been crazy since the COVID trash and all that stuff. And they shut down churches and they stuck you behind a mask. Hey, that's all in the background. Right now, we're right down to some transition, man. Stay in prayer. Stay in faith. Do not fear. Can you hear me? Yes. And so as we see what the Lord has done in the past, let's watch what the Lord's doing for us now, today. And you know, the enemy is really shook up when he can't scare us. The word says that when we don't fear, it brings fear upon the enemy camp. And that's my words, but that's how it comes across. The enemy's camp's pretty shook up just now. I mean, some real high-ups have turned on each other trying to save their own skin. Watch how it works. Jim, do you have a closing prayer for us?
It's an exciting time to be alive, isn't it? God is good. Let's close with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for being with us. Lord, I pray that you would guide us with your peace, that we would walk close with you, that there would be no fear among us. Lord, thank you for your promises. Thank you that you are our solid rock. Lord, I pray that we would go today in confidence with you and that we would share the hope with those around us, Lord. Thank you for your love. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jim.